Hello and welcome to Inner Balance TV. I'm your host, Dwaine Hartman. Tonight I'm interviewing John Anthony West. And as you know, he has gone into Egypt many, many times. He takes tours of people into Egypt and teaches them in real life what it's like to experience Egypt, to experience the magical Egypt. Now, we have been taught a certain thing in our history books about Egypt that's quite limited. And this is what John has been doing. He's been writing books, he's been taking people on tours and making DVDs to assist people to understand what this magical Egypt is. You see, we've had a life in our history that is much more powerful, much more advanced than we have now. But we're not taught that. What we're taught is that we're limited back then and we're becoming more advanced now. And really, we were quite advanced then. It's my hope tonight that you get to experience some of that in hearing the conversation with John and I. And also you can look for his book, Serpent in the Sky. He's got many other books out as well. There's a link below this video for his books and his website. He's also got a DVD out that's called Magical Egypt. And there's lots of things that he has done. So let's move on to the interview. Well, hello, John. It's nice to see you here, and thank you for coming on Inner Balance TV.
Well, I'm flattered that you want me, and thank you very much.
I've watched a lot of videos regarding your trips into Egypt, and very fascinated with the ancient Egypt as well. I don't know, I have a kind of a resonance towards that. So,
well, lots of people have that, you know. I mean, Egypt is, even on the academic level that it's dealt with in our universities and even preschools, lower grades, kids get fascinated by Egypt much more so than the other ancient cultures. And it's not that the teaching is any different, or that there's, let's say, that there's an emphasis placed upon Egypt, but young people resonate to it. And on my trips, which, as you know, I run about 4 times a year, there are always a handful of people who say, this has been a dream of mine since early childhood. And then they often say, I could never do it, and then I didn't know about you or your trips, and all of a sudden I see that there's a different Egypt from what we learned in school, so here I am. But it happens, there's no trip in which there aren't a handful of people who've had this dream since early childhood.
That's the part that I'm really interested in talking about, is this different Egypt. The one that we didn't hear right in our history.
Well, yeah. Well, this is a two-pronged, on my part, a two-pronged assault, because I use that word judiciously, because one, when Egypt is understood through the symbolist point of view put forward by the wonderful genius scholar with the unpronounceable name R.A. Lubitsch, it becomes clear that what the ancients were talking about, the Greeks, the Romans, the magicians and sages and astrologers of the Italian Renaissance, all of them harkened back to Egypt as the fount of all knowledge. Mm-hmm. And that of course is disavowed by the high priests of the only religion that now really has any traction, which I call the Church of Progress. And it is, let's say, it is the basic credo of that church that doesn't call itself a church. It calls itself science and science-based, and it calls itself reason and rational and so on. It's none of those things. It's a debased materialism based upon effectively fraudulent science, but we won't get into that in our hour. That's another big subject.
Yeah,
however, when you're introduced to Egypt through this symbolist point of view, you understand actually something totally at odds with what you've been learned in school, because the basis of the Church of Progress is that we're the most advanced and evolved human beings ever to walk the face of this planet, and by extension probably any other planet. When you experience Egypt, and it's very important that this is experiential. Not everybody can go to Egypt. The trips are expensive, and they're not expensive for what they are, but they cost a bunch of money, and not everybody has it. But I always say, I start lectures off with, it's a good way to start it off with, Egypt is like sex. And everybody goes, oh, sex. Why is it like sex? Well, because you can read all about it, and that's interesting, and you can look at pictures, even great videos and things like that, and that's more interesting. But until you've actually experienced it, you really don't know anything about it. So when we do our trips, which is a couple of weeks of Egypt, one masterpiece after another, seen through this symbolist perspective, you come up with something diametrically opposed, an understanding that is very, very important. I mean, there's maybe no understanding in the world more important to, you can even say, the whole thing, even say to the future of the human race, than the understanding of what a real civilization once was like. Because we have what we call progress, and an enlightened sage of Egypt would call shiny barbarism. It's the antithesis. In other words, progress in our sense is the antithesis of civilization. When you get to Egypt, you can read about it. As I said, books are there, Schwaller's there. I mean, Schwaller's pretty difficult reading, but Serpent in the Sky is also not bedtime reading, but anybody intelligent can pretty much follow it. And the Traveler's Key also fairly easily followed. And there are a number of my colleagues who have written extremely knowledgeably about various aspects of that symbolist point of view. So
these are your books, right? You're speaking of. These are your books.
Well, certainly,
yeah.
But others of my colleagues, Robert Schock and Michael Schneider, writing Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe, a wonderful book on number symbolism and the importance of sacred geometry. Many, many books, actually. Anybody looking on my website or in my own books, in Serpent in the Sky or The Traveler's Key, will find an extensive bibliography of works, of course, the core of which is Schwaller de Lubitsch himself, who, as I said, is not easy. Even though everything is now translated, he's like many really great original minds, not necessarily a great communicator. So my job, actually, because I am first and foremost a writer, a scholar by default, so I have the language tools to make this fairly impenetrable philosophical disposition of Schwaller comprehensible to anybody willing to follow the language, and also open to this kind of point of view. Because this is a different, not so much a different mindset. The Church of Progress prides itself on its intellectual achievements, without for a second acknowledging that great art comes not from the mind, but from the gut, from the heart, from the philosophy. And this is why there is this terrific dichotomy between the Church of Progress and the great civilization, the doctrine of the quest for immortality that fueled Egypt and that sustained it for fully 3,000 years. That Egyptian philosophy is not accessible by the Church of Progress mindset, and they think what they call reason is not reason at all. It's the rationalization of their own personal inner emptiness. This is why they subscribe to the stupidities of Darwinian evolution, and why they think that you can think your way to, let's say, to a civilization, and you can't. You have to actually live your way, practice your way into a real civilization. And when you go to Egypt, you really, as I said, it's like sex. It's you really get it. You really get hit with it, and otherwise it's still on the page and abstract, even when it's gorgeous photography. Anyway, as I said, when we had this discussion earlier before we started, I'm very long-winded, and I get off on.
And that's cool. That's why
I'm passionate about. So you have to shut me up.
We're here to hear you. You know, we're here to hear your experiences and.
Yes.
Now, with this, I've been hearing and experiencing some things where, you kind of take science, art, and religion, and you kind of hold them in that same. It's almost like a portal. It's almost like something different happens to you when you blend those three. And is that kind of what the Church of Progress teaches?
No, the Church of Progress has nothing to do. Is immune to art. Actually, it's hostile to art.
Oh.
Absolutely. It thinks that creative writers and poets and composers and people of that nature are unbalanced, and they're the ones who are really rational and sane. I mean, these people are actually they're a caste below. The Indian caste system that goes. The Brahmins, the priests and the sages, artists, and what's the next one? Kshatriya are the warriors, the guardians of the empire, and next come, I think it's the Vedras. I think are the merchants and the businessmen, and then there's the Vaisyas, the Vedras, I forget one or the other, and then there are the servants, the menials, as it were, the slaves, and then there are the Harijan, which are the untouchables. Well, there's a caste below that, and I got this from friends of mine who are Sanskrit scholars, which I call the Anupadeshe. Mm-hmm. The Anupadeshe are the caste below the untouchables. They're the unteachables. Mm-hmm. And the Church of Progress its priesthood is largely made up of unteachables, and who think they actually know it all, but who understand nothing. Mm-hmm. And they are actually there. You might say that the Church of Progress is the religion of the emotionally defective, spiritually dyslexic, and philosophically depraved.
Okay.
They call it reason. Mm-hmm. And this is, I mean, all the talk about environment, all the talk about climate change, all the talk of technology pointing the way to a future, because technology is what's responsible. By and large, the misuse of technology is largely responsible, or in part responsible for the morass, the spiritual and philosophical morass that we find ourselves in. So in order to get out of this morass, this is where Egypt comes in. You can't do it through the same things that got us into the swamp.
Right.
It has to come from somewhere else. And that's where this is why Egypt is so important, even though it sounds outwardly like a quibble between academics. Sphinx this old or that old, is there anything to the doctrine of immortality? I mean, a quackademic, a rationalist would simply not even contemplate the notion that he or she is not more advanced than the people who built the Temple of Luxor or the pyramids of Giza. Mm-hmm. This is taken as a given, and if you want to chase it up, you go online to some of the skeptical, they misuse that word, the debunking websites, and listen to these jackasses talk about what they consider superstition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In listening to you, I had got it backwards, where I thought you meant the progress, the Church of Progress was the Egyptian religion, and so I got it wrong. So
but exactly the opposite. Yeah.
So
Egypt, it's Egypt. Egypt's what's so great about the sacred science, but also so baffling, is that the Egyptian doctrine is a seamless fusion of art, religion, science, and philosophy. So if you go through it, you find that there's no art that isn't religious, no religion that isn't scientific, no science that isn't philosophical, no philosophy that isn't artistic. It's one fabulous whole, as opposed to our Church of Progress, where everything is separate from everything else. Art has nothing to do with science. Science has nothing to do with philosophy, and is absolutely hostile to religion.
When you sit in that place where all of that is one thing, all of that is one thing, like the religion, the science, there's something different that happens to your mind, isn't it? You begin to really open up. Your soul opens up.
At the risk of being boring, you can only really get it there. You walk into one of these temples and you're engulfed. I mean, it's Goethe who used the phrase, which I quote all the time. He calls architecture frozen music. And that's not a poetic metaphor, it's actually physically the case, because the same laws that apply to harmony apply to architecture, different proportions and so on, and resonance and measure, and all of these things that are you think of in terms that underpin music also underpin architecture.
Yeah.
So you're in an Egyptian temple, you're basically being engulfed in the instrument itself, in stone music, and it resonates. And this is why I go to a lot of trouble to try and get, when we're on trips, up until the revolution. I mean, Egypt was jammed with people, and so to get these places more or less to yourself was really difficult. And I'd go to enormous lengths to get there when they weren't crowded. And actually, it was one of the things that now, once the military, all this stuff is going on now, of course I'm following very closely, and I suspect that the military will impose a level of order and at least a working truce on the Muslim Brotherhood, who I call the Muslim imbeciles, and that tourism will again pick up. So in fact, the time to get to Egypt for anyone interested who's listening is soon. Before maybe there's a year before it really picks up again. Of course, it's not impossible that the whole thing does at some point descend into chaos again. Maybe my best guess, with lots of experience, is that there's at least a window of a couple of years of it not descending into chaos. But economically, it's almost unfixable, and it doesn't matter who's in charge. I mean, if Muhammad himself were the prime minister and Jesus was his minister of the interior, they'd need all the miracles in their book to try and figure out a way out of this morass.
Okay.
There is actually a way, but it's unlikely that anyone's going to come around and follow that particular path. Maybe, you never know.
Yeah. 4 years ago, I heard something going around that they had found something remarkable again in Egypt as far as energy is concerned. Is there any? Did you hear anything about that? Almost like an energy signal?
I'm not sure what you're talking about specifically. I probably have heard. There's a lot of new agey stuff out there talking about energies, and I firmly believe that there's something to this. Maybe not what they're talking about, particularly the pyramids. Well, all of them. You walk into a temple, there are energies, you bet. I mean, just as there's energies in a concert hall when they're playing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony.
Right.
Those are energies. So those are the kinds of energies that are there, but there might be, maybe, even more sophisticated geomagnetic energies that they're tapping into, or even stellar energies that they're tapping into. This is a big complex question. But when you find, for example, that the so-called ventilation shafts of the Great Pyramid are not ventilation shafts at all, but are pointed at specific stars at specific times, suddenly, if you're a little bit smart, and not, which means to say you're probably not an Orthodox Egyptologist, you realize that there has to be a reason for this, and it's not to allow the soul of the pharaoh, who's not buried there in the first place because they're not tombs,
right,
to sort of whistle up the shaft and find his home among the stars. But they could perhaps serve as stereo engineers have come up with this idea, as waveguides for particular stellar energies. And stellar energies reach us all the time. This is no longer unicorny baloney. You know, we
Yes.
know that there are stellar energies, and it becomes clear, for example, that Orion, the constellation of Orion, that the Egyptians equate with their god Osiris, was really the god of becoming and return, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in Orion that the cosmologists and the astrophysicists know this now. It's the area in the sky that we call the constellation of Orion is where the great mass of stars are born.
Right.
Now, they know this back then, no telescopes, nothing. Yeah, it's quite clear that they did know. They knew in a different way than we know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Indian shamans to this day do that.
Mm-hmm.
The shamans of the rainforest have a kind of knowledge that our astrophysicists don't have. They go off on their ayahuasca trips, and they're plugged into cosmology.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite clear that they do this.
Yes.
In the old days, we have certain capacities, capabilities, our ability to use our heads, to reason, to use our intellectual faculties, probably to a greater extent than they had, but they had access to actually much more meaningful emotional and psychic
Mm-hmm.
and intuitive knowledge than we have.
Right.
And
Right.
occasionally, we have people who do have that or get that, or they go through a near-death experience and suddenly they're plugged into a different reality.
Mm-hmm.
It's there. It's not commonplace, and certainly we don't learn it in schools.
Right.
But they had to have had it, or they couldn't have built those incredible things, or done that incredible art.
Exactly. And the more that I see, I mean, I haven't been there, but the more that I see, the whole place is filled with art everywhere,
Oh yeah.
It's telling a story. It's reminding, on another level, it's reminding people of something. Just walking
Exactly.
through it, right?
It's reminding them of their purpose in life and of their destiny.
Yeah.
And actually, this is another hobby horse of mine about Church of Progress. If you want to actually understand any civilization, past or present, all you have to do, you don't need any history books and you don't need any stupid pundits talking on TV. All you have to do is to see where they place their creative energies. So you look at Egypt, and this is really a good case because, yeah, they had their wars and so on, but basically it was one issue civilization, and that issue was the quest for the immortality of the soul. Practically all of its art, architecture, everything was devoted to that single issue in one way or another. In other words, and so all of those, the act of creation, you see, most people in the Church of Progress, technologists are creative to a certain extent, but creativity, it's one thing to create, a bobblehead doll or a gas oven for Auschwitz, and it's quite another thing to use that creative energy to build a pyramid or a temple of Luxor. Mm-hmm. So if you want to understand the civilization, look what it does with its creative energies. Egypt is a great case in point because everything goes into the sacred, as it were, the expression of the sacred. Now, the ones who benefit from that, this is where creativity is so important and why our civilization is as degenerate as it is, because practically nobody in our civilization makes a living out of his or her innate creativity. The machines have taken over, and even if they do make a civilization, even if they do make a living out of their creativity, it's most of the time it's out of creating something. If you've created the Predator drone, if you come home and say to your wife, boy, I just found out how to kill an awful lot of people from a distance, more so than anyone before, if you're proud of that, you're one sick dude. Mm-hmm. The same applies to a bobblehead doll or a Barbie or any of the garbage that the technologists produce. Another thing, if it's architecture or art that summons up a you might say an encounter with the higher powers. That's what sacred art does. Mm-hmm. And so you look at Egypt. That's one thing. You look at what we have. I'm inventing the figures, but I'd be willing to bet that when it comes to science and creativity, in general, about 60 or 70% of it, particularly in science, goes into weapons of mass destruction or weaponry in war. Maybe another 30% or so goes into frivolity, into Disneyland and Hollywood stupid movies and even stupider stuff on television, and bobblehead dolls and garbage. And a tiny couple of percent goes into something that's actually life-enhancing and soul-enhancing. Mm-hmm. Then you see the difference between our Church of Progress and a civilization like Egypt. And Egypt is unique, not so much in its doctrine, which is almost certainly shared by very ancient India, Vedic India, ancient China, almost certainly ancient Mesoamerica. But the difference is that, and all of them date from an incredibly far back into the past. But the difference is that there's so much of Egypt left. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's nothing, let's say 3000 BC in China that you can go visit, or 3000 BC in Europe that you can visit, or even in India, not. But in Egypt, there's so much that's left. I mean, first of all, there's so much that was constructed in the first place, because Egypt, this blessed land, almost impossible to invade, where the food jumps out of the ground, and if you've got enlightened pharaohs and enlightened sages masterminding the whole civilization, they're capable of doing all of these incredible things over the course of thousands of years. And then you have this unbelievable climate. The sand blows. It's next to impossible to attack, or was, because it's on three sides impenetrable desert, and to the north it's the Mediterranean Sea, and then swamps bordering that. So only a couple of times over the course of Egypt's 3,000 years was it successfully attacked and garrisoned, taken over, and those periods called the intermediate period lasted a couple of centuries. That's a long time by our lifespans. But then they were gone, and civilization regrouped itself and proceeded along the way, degenerating as it went. Yeah. Curiously enough, by the time Cleopatra got kicked out, committed suicide, and the Romans took over, the religion was very corrupt and degenerate and powerless. It was still recognizable, but it's a very strange thing that it was at its height toward its beginning, and then went down. But that's another big, the Kali Yugas of the cycles of time, where Plato talks about too. There's a golden age and a silver age, and a bronze age, and an iron age or dark age, which is, despite our electricity, what we're in the middle of, and arguments rage over where exactly we are in this cycle. Right. I have my opinions, but I'm not sure either.
Yeah. But you also agree that further back, more technology, really. I mean, there was a more advanced technology.
Of some sort.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't know how they built these things.
No.
It's on the page. Well, video does a pretty good job of when you can illustrate what you're talking about with video. Actually, if I manage to get this PowerPoint thing that I can't get to you, but my son will be able to get it to you, you'll be able to pick out from that slideshow good slides to illustrate the points that I'm making. So when you're standing there and in front of a block that weighs 75 or 100 tons, that's sort of jigsaw shaped, irregularly shaped, and next to the block, abutting a block so tight that you can't put a piece of paper between them. You're flabbergasted and wondering how on earth they do this ostensibly without a high technology in our sense. Yeah. And I don't know either, but I have some ideas about it. Usually I explain, we go into this. It's fun when you're in Egypt, because you can get into these discussions right on site and say, okay, here's this, here are these casing stones, and you tell me how they got those casing stones in place. And particularly if there are architects or builders on the trip, they're all looking at it. And this again is where academic Egyptology is not only so deficient but so actually criminal, because they don't see it themselves and they refuse to acknowledge the miracles of technology that you have in front of your nose. Because when you see it, and I say, okay, now how do they do that? And there are builders and architects with me who said, well, I don't know, we couldn't possibly do that. This is what you get. There.
It's like they like to keep humanity locked in a box in time, limitless. Limited. And that if we took a real look at this as to what is really going on and how brilliant we were, we might tap into that and actually come out of this box.
Oh yeah, right? Well we might. Yeah, well we might, but it's not that they like to keep people locked in the box. They are locked in the box, but they call it reason. Mm-hmm. And they don't want anybody not to be locked in the box. Anybody who's not marching in step inside their stupid box is regarded as a lunatic or a crackpot or a dreamer or a visionary or something. Mm-hmm. But they are the ones who are locked in the box. As I said, these are the emotionally defective and the spiritually dyslexic. And they think they're reasonable.
Yeah, exactly. And to go into these, there's not universities, but the ancient schools that are still standing there, right? The knowledge that's on the walls that you go in and experience, right?
Not quite. What you go in and experience is the geometry. Yeah. You experience the music. The symbolism, the stuff that's on the walls, would be an open book to the priests who or the artists who put it there. But it's no longer our symbolism. And even if it's explained, which I can do to a certain extent on site, you still don't get it. I mean, I use as an example, symbolism is almost dead with us. But the one form of symbolism that still works, but on a secular level, is the political cartoon, for example. Mm-hmm. So you see a good cartoonist, and he's got Uncle Sam, and he's got John Bull, and he's got La Liberté for France, and he's got the Russian bear, all cut up into pieces like Osiris, in some sort of a juxtaposition that is meaningful if you're following the news, or if you understand what these symbols stand for. And so you look at this, and everybody gets it. It's vertical. In other words, the truck driver gets it, and somebody who's a political Harvard-trained political scientist gets the same thing, but on probably a higher and more complex level. Mm-hmm. So symbolism at work. It's this immediate hit. If you try to explain that political cartoon to a Martian who didn't know anything about what it was, it would take you months, and by the time you got to the end of the explanation, he'd have forgotten what the whole thing was about to begin with. Right. But as long as that's your language, you get it, boom, in an instant. And that's why actually symbolism is a superior form of communication. See, they idiots, the Church of Progress thinks that's even though it's beautifully done, that's inferior to our so what I'm looking for, speculative philosophy, or anyway our linguistic, in other words, communicating through writing rather than symbols. The symbol is actually both more exact and richer, and it doesn't go out of date. Mm-hmm. See, language goes out of date very quickly. Anybody who says they can really read Shakespeare is lying. You can read Shakespeare, but you need a gloss on the side that tells you all the words that you never heard before, or that you have heard before, but they meant something quite different in Shakespeare's day.
Exactly, yeah.
The symbols are the symbols, they're eternal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As you go in and experience personally those symbols, something deeper in you is reminded, isn't it? Something deeper in you resonates with that, almost like home, right?
Oh, absolutely. Particularly the first few times I went there, because, 6 years of study had gone into working on The Serpent in the Sky, so I was thoroughly familiar with the material, but I hadn't been there. So it's like a great piece of music. Music is the best analogy, and when you hear it for the first time, it depends on what it is. I mean, you're not going to get it from gangster rap, but if it's Beethoven's late quartets or Monteverdi's Vespers of 1610 or Bach's B minor Mass, you hear that for the first time. If your emotional faculties are working, you're overcome by it, and then each time you go back, I mean, a good piece of music, yeah, if you play it often enough, you get tired of it, but basically, every time you listen to it, you get something else out of it.
Right, yeah.
I'm not a musician, but with great art, with sacred art, yeah, so when I'm there, I mean, and now I'm always talking, I'm not studying so much, but I always have, when people always say to me, you've done, how many trips have you done? Around 100 probably. How is it still fresh and new? And yeah, it is, because I always have very intelligent people with me who always, there's no trip goes by where I don't learn new things. Sometimes I learn new things because somebody either asks me a question that makes me direct my own, let's say, trained intuitive senses to it, or comes up with something absolutely that I've missed even 100 times I've been there, and you miss it. So trips always present that, yes. Yeah, so it doesn't wear out, and I think, actually, I really do believe this, and could possibly prove it, that by going as often as I do, and by going in this spirit of both learning for myself and communicating what I know to others, what I know and feel to others, is really is enhancing for me. I mean, I'm getting things from it all the time.
And there is when you enter that space, where you're the science, the art, the philosophy, and all is one. I mean, really, there's no space and time. You can kind of move in and out of that. Imagine what it would be like, to be in that time, and actually, experience maybe even connection to some of these beings. I mean,
that's exactly what you experience, and that's what it's for. In other words, through the use of sacred geometry, in other words, stone music, each of the so-called gods, who should be understood as cosmic principles, are associated with specific numbers or sets of numbers, which in turn give rise to specific geometries, specific measures, specific harmonies when they're blended together. So when you are entering, let's say, a Horus temple or an Ammon temple or a Hathor temple, you're actually entering into Ammon or Hathor or Horus music, and you get it. I mean, it's resonating. You get it as if you were listening to a Beethoven symphony, and it's important, of course. It doesn't work. You can't listen to Bach in the middle of the Super Bowl. No. So it's important to have that experience orchestrated insofar as it's possible. So this is why I go to such pains to try to get to the temples when there are few people there or nobody there.
Right.
Because I always, actually, as a matter of course, I learned this very early on. I don't go jabbering away the way I am now. When we hit a temple, I give everybody a certain amount of time to go and experience it for themselves, and then we regroup and talk about what we've experienced and why we've experienced it. So it's, I've been doing this now, almost 30 years. So
right.
I'm pretty practiced at it.
Yeah. And you enjoy it. You
obviously, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. People always say, as I said, if you're a musician, if you're really somebody who's basically creative, And you know, as I said, I'm a scholar by default. I'm really a writer by trade. I started out writing novels and plays. Actually, I still do that.
Right.
But I'm better known for the scholarship. But you know, if you're involved in anything genuinely creative, as long as you don't run out of vision, it's always exciting.
Mm-hmm.
You never run out.
That's right.
Ever.
Yeah.
Only when the machine breaks down, you know, that's different. But my machine is so far pretty resistant.
Yes. And that's because you're in your passion, in your creativity.
What's that?
That's because you're in your creativity.
Oh yeah. That's right. Yeah.
You know?
Good. People aging. If you my definition of happiness is different from other people's definition of happiness. It's not a warm puppy. It's when you wake up in the morning and what you have to do is what you would choose to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so as long as you're doing, as long as your life is consecrated, devoted to doing what you think is important to do, it's always exciting.
It is, yes.
Always.
Yeah. And that's again taking us back to living in our true nature, though. Our true nature
Yes.
is to express. Right?
To express and to create. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Which is what the Church of Progress deadens, what our education deadens.
yeah. I'm so with you on that. You know, I really see it. And really try to help people to come out of that aspect and find a passion within themselves and start doing it.
This is the problem, actually, because, as I said, the nature of Western civilization is that only a tiny percentage of people can actually make a living out of their own creativity, and even that tiny percentage are devoted to doing things that are inherently either worthless or positively pernicious.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, if you're working on the latest drone or the latest surveillance thing to keep track of us, or the latest thing that's going to carpet bomb whatever,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're a monster.
No. Yeah. Yeah. But if you are helping people to reconnect, if you're helping people to come back to that, and like you are, because you're taking people in there to Egypt and getting them to experience these songs, this music.
Well, that's right. Yeah.
And in there, you know, because in there they can connect to what it is that they need to do.
Oh, yeah. Yes, it doesn't work on the emotionally defective and the spiritually dyslexic, but it works on a lot of people. And actually, one of the why I call one of my opponents, I don't know if you know who Mark Lehner is, got very upset because I said in my first book, Serpent in the Sky, I compared Orthodox Egyptology to intellectual Agent Orange, and he thought that was he couldn't handle that. But it's absolutely true. My original plan when I started doing the trips was to train enough people. There are only a hand. This is one of the problems. There are only a handful of people who understand Schwaller well enough to re-communicate it, and I just so happens I'm the only one that actually does trips. But there are others who could do it, and I the idea of training people up. You know, I have a basic curriculum, as it were, of my own basic trip. But then, like any teacher, you know, everyone would handle it differently. Mm-hmm. And then that was also, because money has always been a big problem for me. I was thinking, well, you know, I'd get a commission, and everybody would live happily ever after. But no sooner had I actually published my guidebook. I don't know if you remember back that far. You might. 85, I think it was. And there was the first of the terrorist attacks. They threw this guy off a cruise boat in Alexandria. The guy was on a wheelchair, and there was a big hullabaloo. And tourism died completely in Egypt for a whole year. And the guidebook, which started out being in all the bookstores and so on, disappeared from the bookstores. It's still in print, and it trickles along. But that was, and so since that time, periodically there have been, you know, episodes of one sort or another. In the 90s, a lot of them.
Yeah.
So I never got it. I never got it together. But my idea was to train a number of people up so that at least a percentage of people would see true symbolist Egypt.
Well, I know that there's a lot of people interested.
Yeah. Well.
And maybe just setting up the word here again. I know you have before, but
oh yeah.
You know.
Yeah, you'll probably know what your audience base is. There will be people who are interested. The problem is that the combination of the cost, which is not cheap, I mean, but it's no more than the cost of going X number of weeks to France or something like that. It's basically the same, and it's high end because we stay in good hotels and so on. But the combination of the money and the time and the ability to get away for a couple of weeks really narrows the field to not many. And then now with all of this stuff going on, I have to go way out of my way to convince people that even though it really is going on, nobody is after us. And the chances are that they're not going to be after us either because tourism is too important to them. And now, as I said earlier, this is a great time to go because it's empty. And it's going to stay empty. I mean, even if the military imposes a truce upon the country that's a workable truce, it takes a good 8 months, a year for tourism to build back up again because, people, it's not like going on a subway ride. It's, people have to plan in advance and it's expensive and blah, blah. So this is the perfect window for anybody who wants to go, is to get in quick before it all gets expensive again.
When's your next trip in?
Next open trip is in November.
In November.
Sometimes I do dedicated trips for a particular study group or something like that, and then it's not open to outsiders. But there's a trip in November, and then, all things being equal, there will be a trip in March.
Okay. All right. And of course, I'll have your website above the video.
Website, I don't have the November trip up on the website yet, but all the information is there. So it's basically the same trip as the one that's listed there. So if anybody interested gets a sense of, what we'll be doing on which day and so on, it will be fundamentally the same price, probably close to the same. I just have to get the different dates up there.
Sure. Okay. Well, I thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Dwaine.
And if there's anything you want to leave people with,
Pardon?
If there's anything you want to leave people with, a thought, idea, something you want to share with people as we say goodbye, just go ahead if you wish.
Oh, well, really, I mean, if this is the first you've heard of Egypt from the symbolist point of view, and it attracts you, pursue it.
Yes.
And my own books are, of course, there. And then there's the Magical Egypt series. Do you know that one, the 8-episode Magical Egypt series?
No,
Dwaine?
I don't.
Oh, you Google it up. I have it for sale, but I don't have it up on my website.
It's DVD?
Really, it's 8 DVDs.
Well, I'll
Magical Egypt Symbolist Tour.
I'll have it, if it's on Amazon, I'll have it below.
I don't think it is on Amazon, but I mean, I have them privately because I'm in it with a partner who didn't want to do Amazon because actually they extort so much of the profit. But we're about to put it up on with my Mystery of the Sphinx, the Charlton Heston. You've seen that, right? And there's a distributor and a guy who does the fulfillment, and we're negotiating with him for putting putting Magical Egypt up there. At the moment, there are pirated versions up there. If you go, I think, to YouTube, it's the quality is terrible, and you don't have the whole episodes. You're only a few minutes per episode, but it's enough so that you can get a good idea of it.
Yeah.
And so anyway, but
I'll have. I'll put something. I'm going to put something together for people below for your DVDs, so it comes to you.
Sure. Well, anybody who wants them, I sell them. Mystery of the Sphinx is actually on Netflix. People can either get DVDs from me personally if they want to own a copy, but they can get it on Netflix. And so there are other places you can get it too. I forget what, Hulu or something. This is UFO Central, the distributor's fulfillment house that does it. But we'll soon have Magical Egypt up as well. And, you know, my own books are probably as good an introduction to sitting with Egypt as anything out there. And then you follow your nose once you're through with the serpent, because some people are really fascinated by the geometry and the symbolism. Others are fascinated by the technological aspects of it. Other people are interested in the spiritual, esoteric angle. So there's a substantial, responsible literature out
and you
there.
cover all that in those books.
Oh, yeah, well, I touch upon it in my own books, but then other people are more specialized in it and elaborate and develop from what Schwaller first was. And then, of course, there's Schwaller himself. I mean, those books are all translated now, translated very well. But Schwaller is, it's not easy stuff. Same applies to the Gurdjieff work, which I'm much involved in all along. And The Serpent in the Sky is starting off with Schwaller is like taking your first driving lesson in a Ferrari. You don't want to do that. So The Serpent is a good It's a good introduction.
Well, thank you, John. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Pleasure.
I'd like to do it again if you
we can. There's a lot of stuff we didn't talk about. We didn't talk about the Sphinx and the water weathering and the civilization aspect of it. So there's plenty to talk about.
We'll make a point of doing that on the next show.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll be interested to see what kind of feedback you get.
Okay.
So let's see. Good.
Well, thank you. Take care. Thank you very much.
Electronically. And,
yes.
We'll be in touch.
Okay. Bye for now.
Take care. Bye.